Hello, this is Evan, the Get It Together Man. And today I'm going to show you how we assemble the 13 foot by 11 foot wood gazebo with the metal roof from Wayfair. The brand is COZYWOR. So here we are getting the cross beams, lumber set up on our tables there. These pieces here were sort of warped, and you'll see later in the video we had trouble getting one of them to line up, and it never did get completely straight. This wood also comes pretty raw, without any stain on it as far as we could tell or anything. So if you get this gazebo, I would recommend sealing it right away. Okay, I'm the guy in the gray shirt and the bandana, and here's something that I'm doing here. Slow the video down. You can see I'm lining up these two boards that go together, and they're not flush on either end. It doesn't really say this in the instructions, but it turns out you need to have that centered. I'm working on the short board, the 11-foot side. My helper there is working on the longer side, and those boards actually end up being flush on the ends. But this one, you need to make sure it's centered. It ends up being about an inch on each side, up and overhang there. This product we were not very impressed with. It seemed like the wood was not straight, like I just said. Also, the way the metal roof fit together, we were having trouble with that. I'll explain that when we get to it. And just some of the holes were not drilled great. But overall, I mean, it ended up turning out okay. But I think for the money, there's some other products that are better. And I'll explain as we came across various problems how we fixed them and got this together. As we get these cross beams done, we're laying them on the ground about where they're going to go, and that helps us with the spacing when we assemble the legs, which is what we're getting ready to do next. Got those corbel diagonal brace pieces on the table, the metal brackets that go on the top and bottom of each leg, and here we are getting the legs set up for the first pre-assembly. I thought it would be clever to put the top brackets on each post now rather than later like the book says. This ended up being a little confusing, and so it doesn't really save any time to do that. You have to have in your head pretty clearly how the leg is going to be oriented once it's stood up, and we ended up having to switch one of the brackets around. So it doesn't actually save that much time. Tools that you need to do the hardware for this step is a 17 mil socket driver, an Allen key driver, which I think was a size 5, and Phillips for the wood screws. Also, you can see that lumber laying in the middle there. That's some spare lumber that I brought to brace up the legs with the clamp. You'll see how we do that in a minute. And you want to have a square to make sure these legs are perpendicular with one another before you tighten everything down. When we're bracing these legs up, we're trying to feel which way the pair of legs is wanting to tip, if it might be to the left or the right, and have the legs, the bracing wood out in that direction. Sometimes they both end up facing the same direction like we did here. You usually have one facing one way and one the other. Oh, it looks like that is what we did there. One to the left and one to the right. Here's how you can tell if you have the legs oriented correctly. Those holes there are for the corbels later. They need to be facing up and out. That's the outer corner. Here you can see it on the legs that are stood up. They're on the outside. So you know that that's the corner that's going to be facing out of the structure. So that's how we like to have it set up. And then this top bracket, like I said, you don't have to put this on now. It didn't really save us that much time, but that needs to be facing diagonally towards the inside of what's going to be the inside of the structure. Here we are trying to mess with that beam that ended up being warped, and I know it's a little hard to tell with this lens that I'm using, but this board was warped. So we took the screws out, we tried to shape it a little bit, put the screws back in, and it didn't actually end up helping that much. We had to mess with it again later. And here, this hole is not drilled all the way through for that bolt to go through, so I had to get a drill bit there. You can sort of see it doesn't quite go all the way through, so I had to do a little extra drilling here. And then I still had to bang it through with my impact driver anyway. These bolts here through the top of the corbel are going into some T-nuts that came preloaded in the wood. And you're going to want to pay special attention to the way you drive that in. Do it nice and easy at first, maybe even start it with your finger. Because if it gets cross-threaded in those T-nuts, it's already embedded in the wood, and that's going to be pretty hard to get the T-nuts swapped out. So you don't want to strip those threads if you can help it. Now we're doing the same steps for the long crossbeam assembly, getting it attached up in the air. And before we tighten everything down, use your square to make sure everything is perpendicular and flush. Here's another instance where some of the pieces were not machined very well. The holes to the T-nuts that take this corbel up here were not all the way through. And so I drilled it down a little bit, and then I used my knife to get a chunk of wood out. That way the threads of the T-nuts were wide open for the bolts. It doesn't come across great on the camera, but I'm trying to show how you line up those holes in the corbels with the holes in the outside of the post. You can't really see it in there, but that's what you want to shoot for. Get the little lag screws into those pre-drilled holes. Here we are messing with that beam again. Neither of us really like the way it's bowed up, and we're trying to make an adjustment here to get it to come down and get straighter, but nothing we tried really did anything. If we pulled it down, it would throw the legs out of square, so we just kind of left it the way it was, and the roof ended up being fine, and after it was all said and done, I don't think you could really tell that it was bowed that much. Now my friend is putting the diagonal cross beams up on the top of each post. That's pretty straightforward. And here's the structure I'm getting ready to assemble on that table. You need to pay particular attention to these holes on the long side of this rectangle. Learned from my mistakes, I didn't do that, and later that's going to come back to bite me. But putting the structure together is pretty straightforward. You just need to make sure those pre-threaded holes are facing up. The nice thing about this ridge cap assembly is, even though it's a two-man job to get it up here, once you got it up there, it sort of rests on those diagonal pieces, so it helps you hold it while you get the bolts threaded on there. When we're putting up these support pieces, we're only bolting it to the top assembly and not screwing it into the wood just yet. We're doing that so the rest of the roof structure can determine the spacing and tell us exactly where these pieces are going to hit on the wood. This part here is the bottom bracket that's going to hold the roof panels on to the top roof section. It's a little tricky to do with one person. There's one screw that goes into each corner, but it goes through both pieces of metal. So as I work my way around here, I've got one screw through the end of each corner, and then I have to come back and put the screw together on the two on either side here. And the last corner I did, I'll show it from a couple different angles because it was hard to get that screw. The spacing just wasn't quite right to get that screw started threading with the camera up on the ladder like I've got it here. So I had to move the ladder and move the camera, and then I was able to get a better pushing angle to get that bolt threaded. Alright, and now it's time to unpack the roof panels. They come in their own box, and we're getting them all out here and laying them out. The corners on a lot of these were kind of mashed, which is really unfortunate because there's a groove there. The corrugated groove overlaps for each panel, and with the corners bent down, it was hard to get them into the bottom bracket channel that holds them up there. It was also hard to get the panels to line up exactly right. They just got damaged in shipping. Maybe they weren't packed very well. This ridge cap piece that I'm getting ready to put on was also not shaped quite right, sort of bent. Here's what it's supposed to look like. And this last piece is sort of a bar with a V on both ends, and it overlaps the diagonal seam cover ridge pieces. But we had to sort of loosen up some of the stuff we already did to get that to fit just right. Just not very precision pieces on this kit. Now we're putting the rest of the roof structure up. This is going to hold the larger roof panels on. This is pretty straightforward, one screw on each side of these bars. This bottom bracket is similar to the bottom bracket around the top part of the roof. We started in a corner together, and as we go down, we kind of have to take the bolt out that's holding the previous bar up and then put it back in through the two of them there. It's sort of hard to tell what's going on. And now we're putting the wood screws in to those other roof bracket parts where we skipped that earlier. And now we are putting the curtain rods on, which you'll see here I'm putting the curtain rod on in probably the most awkward way, doing it from the inside of the roof here. There are some divots in the top of these boards where the wood screws go. That's how you know it's spaced right. But it's much easier to do this from the outside of the structure like my friend is, rather than the inside. So there I switched to doing it on the outside. These roof panels go up much the same way as the little roof section did. There's a channel along the bottom row that they slide into, and then on the diagonals there's a couple of bolts that get attached. And then there's a couple of bolts that go through the very middle of the roof panel with a little plastic spacer that comes up from the bottom and a lock nut. And that part's pretty awkward to do. I think I show that a little closer up later on. Okay, and here I am discovering my big mistake with this structure from earlier. Those holes there that are not facing up are now facing down, and they can't take the bolts through the tops of the panel that hold that down. So I've gone off to the hardware store to figure out a solution for that while my friend does most of the roof by himself here. Since a number of these panels have bent corners, it's pretty annoying to get these lined up just right and slid down into the channel, and then to get the one overlapping corrugation bump lined up just right. So hopefully if you get this gazebo, your corners are not bent. Some of them you can bend back into shape. Some of them are just bent, and you have to try to do your best. Here I am struggling to put the middle row bolt through with the plastic spacer underneath and the lock nut. This might be good to try to do with two people, one person on the underneath to hold the spacer and the lock nut and another person from the top to drive the bolt, but there it is there, the spacer, the bolt, and the lock nut. We each did this by ourselves, which is possible, but maybe doing it together would be a little better. This seam cover that my friend is putting on there ended up being a two-person job as well. There's a bar at the top that goes into a hole in the roof assembly there, and then it needs to go over the outside of the corner on the bottom, and it takes 2 long bolts through it. It wasn't really lining up, so here I am on the inside lining up the top while he lines up the bottom, and that worked much better. While my friend starts getting the mosquito netting organized, I'm getting a hold of the client to make sure the gazebo's where they want it. And then I'm going to go to the top section of the roof there and work on my solution to attach the tops of the roof panels to that bar with the upside down holes. There are the holes there, you can see them. They're facing down, they should be facing up. So I got some bolts to fill those holes from the hardware store just so it doesn't look like an empty hole. And here I've got a right angle bit for my impact, a Phillips driver, and some self-tapping roof screws that I'm going to put through the top of the panel into that bar. And this ended up working really well. I've got a center punch there, and I'm just getting a hole punch started, and I'm driving each of those screws down through the panel. I got enough of those self-tapping roof screws so that I could put one through the top of each ridge as well, because those were not coming together very well, especially at the top, so I just put one self-tapping roof screw through each of the corrugation grooves as well. Here's the middle mosquito netting, and this gazebo, it just velcros onto this upper portion of the roof. Pretty straightforward. And that is pretty much it. We are just cleaning up now. We did not anchor this down because you can see it's on a brick paver patio, and drilling through the brick and putting wedge anchors into there would just destroy the brick. Plus, this client had a gazebo in this location before that was not anchored down, so they decided not to do that. If you're in the St. Louis area and you want some hard to assemble items put together, please look me up on my website, getittogetherman.com. We do swing sets, furniture, exercise equipment, gazebos. We love to put your stuff together for you. Have a great weekend.